whenever you're listening to this. It's another exciting edition of Wednesday One Thing. It's Maury Rubin here at Clearbank with my partner in crime, Hamza, who's an account director on the sales team. Today, we have a really exciting episode for you guys, talking about some really interesting developments in the direct-to-consumer space, as well as 3 other interesting tech topics. So let's just jump right into this. The first big Wednesday One Thing topic that I wanted to discuss and get some insights from Hamza is on Lululemon's acquisition of Mirror. And for those of you in the interwebs who don't know what Mirror is, it's a really exciting direct-to-consumer fitness hardware/app, and very similar to Peloton, which is an interactive way for people to get on a recumbent bike and share their progress and times with people across the world. Mirror is a home fitness company that allows you to stand in front of a mirror and do the exercises that are coming at you. So whatever the app prescribes you. And basically, the reason it's really exciting is Lululemon, of course, is one of the premier athletic companies. They sell very famously leggings. They've been in the news a lot in the past with their lifestyle. It's a lifestyle brand. And for them, it's actually their first acquisition in the space. I think it's actually their first acquisition as a company as a whole. And they're purchasing Mirror for $500 million. So it's a very exciting direct-to-consumer exit. The reason it's kind of interesting is I think Hamza can probably speak to this from our portfolio side, but in the space of athletics and fitness, we've seen a big boost in that space, especially over what we're dealing with COVID. But in general, it's also just an interesting tie-in for linear commerce. So I'm wondering, Hamza, from your side, speaking to founders all day, like what have you noticed in the fitness space, and what do you sort of think about this play for acquiring a company like Mirror?
Yeah, so super cool development, I think, because the most noticeable trend in the fitness space is that, see, gyms have closed, to state the obvious. And so brands that really catered to, in terms of apparel, in terms of things people would take with them to gyms or to, sporting events or sporting activities, those are the ones that have seen either a decline or haven't really seen much growth in their revenue from those sources. When a brand like Mirror basically, enters in this sort of environment, I mean, it's not entered in this environment, but when it operates in this kind of environment, it's just had such a leg up because they've always catered to fitness at home. And for me, like, this move makes a lot of sense from Lululemon's part, because at the end of the day, you want to make sure you can diversify. You want to make sure that you are able to tap into the markets that are growing. And Lululemon makes, it's become a lifestyle brand. It really started out as a bit of a fitness apparel brand. That's really still their core mission. And acquiring Mirror basically allows them to, build on further that vision, enhance their digital capabilities as well, and really sort of spread their message within people's homes. I think it's a very natural partnership. Huge congrats to the founders who saw such a successful exit. And it's also really interesting because Lululemon was actually one of the investors in Mirror's Series B last year, when the company was valued at 300 million. And fast forward 1 year, they've ended up buying out the whole company itself for a valuation of 500, or planning on buying out the company for 500 million.
Yeah.
So that link between Lululemon and Mirror has been there for at least a year, as far as we know, and just a very natural fit as far as Lululemon's own expansion is concerned.
So one of the interesting takes that I read on this comes from the 2 p.m. newsletter, and they said that this is a really interesting point for Lululemon, as you mentioned, to get into the lives of their consumers, and this is a really essentially the most perfect execution of linear commerce. So if you can imagine, if you're Lululemon and there's a mirror in everyone's home, they're doing their yoga classes, they're interacting with people, and right after the yoga class, you can now see an ad for Lululemon water bottle or Lululemon yoga mat or Lululemon new leggings, and all that data they'd have on you from all the classes you've been doing, what you're interested in. And I think it's an amazing opportunity for them to continuously engage with their really engaged community already, and continue that relationship inside the home, which again we're seeing is such becoming such an important channel for a lot of these brands. And the last thing on this, as you mentioned, in Lululemon's strategy and why this is such a perfect partnership for them, the CEO of Lululemon noted on the acquisition that it is Lululemon's goal to be the experiential brand that ignites a community of people living the sweat life. That line, the sweat life, it kills me. It looks like a beautiful hashtag. It makes me gag a little bit, but I think this is, it's exactly aligned with their mission. And I guess just touching on what we're seeing as the home as being such an important not only acquisition channel, but the home as being sort of this new frontier of what people are spending on. Have you noticed anything else with our founder base or with anyone you've seen as bolstering just bolstering e-commerce for household items or things that are going around in the house?
Yeah, 100%. I mean, product diversification has been one of the biggest learnings for many e-commerce founders over the past 2-3 months. And, we've all been talking about how remote work and work from home is going to be a more present reality. It's something that's going to be much more prevalent in the years to come now that people have really experienced it. And just by that logic, you can sort of apply that to pretty much everything else. There's so many things that people are learning to do inside their homes now that previously they had only ever associated with going out. And brands and markets are responding to that. In many cases, those brands already exist and they saw sharp growth. And in other cases, founders that I've spoken to have launched new product lines that cater to an in-home demand for fitness, entertainment. I mean, I could go vertical by vertical, but there's so much more that's opened up just because of how important it is to have products that fit the consumer inside their home, as well as those that fit the consumer when they're outside their home. So that's been a pretty big change in that end. And to that end, a lot of the founders I've spoken to have been taking capital for those purposes to diversify their product line, to launch more products and get more inventory in the door, and then market those products. That's really been a big play and one of my big learnings as well over the past, say, 3 months.
Awesome. So moving right along, that's our big story of the week, was the acquisition. We have some other mini stories that we're going to get Hamza's hot takes on. The first here is Kanye West has inked a 10-year deal with Gap to essentially relaunch his line and be a creative director with Gap. So what's really notable here is Gap's global sales have been falling since 2017. So in 2017, there were 5.3 billion in global sales. 2019, $4.6 billion. The real question here, Hamza, for you is Gap cool again? Is Yeezy going to save the Gap brand?
I think this is a big win for Kanye. No, I'm just kidding. It's obviously a huge deal for Gap. The thing with Gap is, I mean, Gap has so many brands operating under under the company itself. Like, for example, Banana Republic. You sort of almost forget that, and you think about Gap as the name brand as we know it. You correctly identified their sales have been falling since 2017, I think. So pretty big news for Gap. I guess the publicity that comes with Kanye. I mean, we see influencers make a big difference on marketing for direct to consumer brands, for example, in with many of the direct to consumer brands that we work with. And just by that logic, I mean, you get someone like Kanye who's a pretty good influencer, and you associate him with a really big brand like Gap. And I think it's a big win for Gap to get them on board, and a big win for Kanye because he's obviously he's only taken this deal because he thinks it's good for his new clothing line partnership, for his new clothing line to build this partnership with Gap. So just sounds like a pretty big win-win.
Have you actually seen some of the clothing lines that came out of some of those old Yeezy launches?
Yes, I did.
I mean, look, I'm not a fashionable person. I'm not very cool either, but I don't get it. Like, is that what he's launching with Gap? Like, is that the clothing line that's going to launch? I know that he has the shoe deal with Adidas, and definitely people gobble those up whenever a new one launches. But do people wear the clothing?
I mean, yes, they do. I'm not too sure what the revenue statistics for his clothing line have been over the past few years, but I think if they're selling with the Yeezy name brand, that's like one huge plus point for any brand ever. And now they're selling in Gap, or will be selling in Gap. They'll be selling in store. Um, People are going to buy it, and people are going to buy from Gap as a result. So with the Yeezy Adidas partnership, I would actually argue like that really was a big win for Kanye to get Adidas on board.
Mm.
Um, and with Gap and Kanye, I would lean towards this being a bigger win for Gap to get Kanye on board. But at the end of the day, I mean, Kanye wouldn't have jumped on if he didn't have product lines launching that were going to, benefit from this partnership from Gap. And I think we're probably going to see his clothing line become a lot more popular over the next 10 years than we currently think it is.
Interesting. So the editor of Luxury Daily said that Yeezy is going to be bringing street cred to Gap, and that just sounds like the opinion of someone who's over 30, because I've never heard anyone use the word street cred in a non-boomery type way to describe anything. So hot take on this. This is gonna save Gap.
Yes, I said that with hesitation.
So that's a lukewarm take. So you might save Gap.
Yeah,
All
not
right.
very hot, but a take nonetheless.
All right, next hot take from you. This is a story from just yesterday. The e-commerce company Elliott just folded, and if you don't know what Elliott is, it is I guess a pseudo competitor, or was a pseudo competitor to Shopify, but essentially it was a platform, an e-commerce platform that promised low code to no code storefronts, global payments, as well as cross-border shipping, and it was a really an interesting platform to allow really these self-starters to jump onto e-commerce in a very frictionless way. They were set to launch in June, and after a failed June launch, they said it was going to launch in December. The CEO left, and now it is defunct. So Hamza, what happened there? And yeah, what was your take on it? Because there was a lot of hype around it. Do you think this leads the way for new e-commerce e-commerce platforms to come in? Did that pave the way, or is it just, Shopify is it, Amazon and Shopify are just going to duke it out for forever?
Yeah, I mean, first of all, it's just it's pretty sad. That's the first thing that comes to mind. Obviously, no one likes to see a company go down, and Elliott had made waves. They had made waves in the e-commerce community on Twitter. People knew what Elliott was. A lot more than most people know of brands that haven't even fully launched yet. So for them to wind up operations and go defunct it's not good news. Obviously, I think there are a lot of details to the way they folded. When I read their statement that they gave out, I think yesterday, about title the end of Elliott, there were some indicators, but it's kind of hard to sort of wrap my head around exactly what went wrong. Obviously, you don't want to comment on anyone's personal situations either. So you take everything into account, and it's not quite clear. As for the future of e-commerce platforms, look, Shopify, Amazon are big, right? And they're big because they offer so much to the consumer, and their consumer being obviously the brand. I think it's a very high bar to reach. If you're a competitor to Shopify or Amazon or even any of the smaller e-commerce platforms. Looks like Elliott tried their best, but they couldn't make it. I'm not sure if we are going to see any major alternatives to Shopify or Amazon at least in the next year, couple of years. But you never know. There could be one around the corner. But yeah, my overwhelming sentiment when I read this news is just like it's a sad.
I think just an interesting point on definitely challenger platforms. We know that the growth of e-commerce over the past few months has just skyrocketed. So it's sort of reasonable to assume that someone else can come in and do this better, especially for the fact that so many merchants are now coming online. So it's a matter of why did this fail, and what do future e-commerce platforms, what can they learn from this launch? Because it just seems that obviously the future is e-commerce. There has to be some challenger brands that could come out of the woodwork.
100%. I think we'll find out more as the dust settles on what really went down with Elliot.
All right, hot take there. And finally, the last one we have here, and this one I'm not super surprised about, but I'd love your take on it, is TikTok and 58 other Chinese apps have now been blocked in India. And the reason for that was cited, they posed a threat to sovereignty and security. And I think just with TikTok, some of the really disturbing things I've been reading online of what the TikTok app has been able to access. Here's just some of them that someone found after they reverse engineered the TikTok app. The first one is that apparently it could read things that were copied to your clipboard. The other ones is that TikTok apparently collects data on their phone hardware, CPU type, hardware IDS, screen dimensions, other apps you have installed, anything network related, whether or not the phone has been rooted or jailbroken. And just some of these things are I mean, I'm not a huge hardware or app person, so I'm not like, I don't see how you sort of mesh that together to form a lot of information other than like what other apps are installed. But from a security point of view, obviously that's very scary, especially if a foreign national has all that information over so many users. So I'm wondering like what you think about the banning in India and what that means for potential future bans in other countries.
Yeah. So while some of the things you mentioned are news to me, on a personal note, the reason why I don't use TikTok is because of the literature that I'd read on their data security, which didn't I couldn't justify getting on an app that I had no dying interest for, based on what I presumed their data security setup was. At the same time, I think the ban itself is less down to just data concerns. There's a lot more geopolitics at play here. Now, obviously, I'm not a geopolitical expert to say the least, but China and India have had a military confrontation over the past few weeks, and a lot of there's some benign sounding apps on that 58, 59 long list as well. I think this is really just down to a geopolitical move, but that is still interesting insofar as what that means for Chinese app companies operating in other countries, and whether politics plays a role. The host country's political relations with China play a role in allowing those apps to even operate in that host country. At the end of the day, I think TikTok had revenues of something around 17 billion in 2019, and India made up a tiny fraction of that. So in terms of a revenue hit, it's not, overwhelming for TikTok. I do, however, believe that content creation, so in India is not a huge market for TikTok in terms of revenue, but it is a huge source of content creation for TikTok, which is obviously important for a company like TikTok that creates that is a platform for creative content. So revenue-wise, not a big hit. Content creation-wise, perhaps it is. There's probably more geopolitics at play here than just simply data concerns. I think that might be a bit more of a front. At the same time, it will be interesting to note what happens with TikTok or other apps like WeChat also got banned, for example. What happens with those apps in other countries should they get into similar political confrontations with China?
Yeah, I had TikTok for a bit, and after reading a lot of the data security concerns, I did delete it. I miss it so much. The memes were so hot. They were flaming hot memes. But I think at this point, I don't think any security breaches like this are worth any more memes. But I will note that as a platform, and for getting messages out and mobilizing people or advertising, it's such a good and potent platform. Like, it's so addicting, and you could see people on the platform like blowing up over just a few TikToks, and so the proliferation of the platform into people's lives has definitely has definitely gotten to a point where it's very popular. And I'm wondering, like, with all these concerns, will that have an effect of it being removed from the app stores in Canada or the US, or do people simply not care?
I don't think we care enough right now, and to be honest, I'm not sure that like the threat from like like a national security threat is really on top of people's minds, or if it even exists from a TikTok perspective. On a personal level, in terms of my own data, I wasn't fully comfortable. Um, I, I just think that it's bad news for TikTok that they're being banned because of you know um, wider geopolitical um, circumstances. So that doesn't bode well for Chinese apps generally, like TikTok, like WeChat, in other markets, if similar political confrontations are to occur. But from a data privacy standpoint, I don't think we're going to see a huge backlash, social or political, just based on data concerns against TikTok in the near future. I think it'll be a lot. I mean, there was no hint of distrusting TikTok in India before they had their military confrontation earlier this month or last month. All of this really came around as a result of those developments. So it's really hard to dissect the two and see like what had a more overbearing presence on the decision to ban TikTok. It's not good news for TikTok, but at the same time, I don't think data privacy concerns are enough to bring down the TikTok empire among Gen Z in Canada and the US and so on.
Interesting. Well, Hamza, thank you so much. Another really enlightening Wednesday One Thing and fiery hot takes from you. Thank you everyone out there for listening, and we'll be back next Wednesday with more news of the week. Cheers.
Hey, awesome. Cheers, guys.